Hi friends, my name is Helena and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be doing my review of Halloween Kills, which I saw last night. I have a lot of feelings about this movie, a lot good, a lot not bad, but things I am unsure about as we head into the final movie of the trilogy. So let's get into it. Overall, just looking at the movie, just without the context of the trilogy, just looking at it in a vacuum, I thought it was a very enjoyable time. I had a good time in the theater. It was a movie where there was a lot going on. It had a lot of the things that I was looking for from it as a movie, both the more kind of serious elements, things that were carrying over from the first movie as far as the long-term story of Laurie and her family, as well as some of the more ridiculous elements that are inherent to a slasher movie with an insanely high body count. The kills were a lot. There is a lot of eye gouging, bone cracking, neck snapping, hair pulling. It's just every gross, ooh, thing that you could think of in a slasher is done in this. I feel like it's almost cheating to say which kill I like the best because I had my eyes covered for most of them. It just lingered so long. I feel like I'm probably generally built more for a more PG-13 slasher. I do think I appreciate those cutaways at the last second, and like I said, this shit lingers. And just the brutality of some of them, there's one kill where it's the dude is dead. He has a knife in his back, and Michael is just taking knives out of the out of the block one after the other into this guy's back while his wife watches. And it's the guy's wife, not Michael's wife. Michael does not have a wife in this movie. Wouldn't that be a twist? Bride of Michael? I would like to see it. So it was a brutality that was definitely carried over from the first movie in this trilogy. To kind of differentiate, when I say the first movie, I'm talking about the Halloween 2018, and when I say the original, I'm talking about Halloween 1978. To kind of clear that up, I know it's very confusing. We've got a lot of timelines we're working with here, but there is obviously a lot of brutality in the first movie of this trilogy, like when the guy gets spiked on the fence, the doctor just gets his head full stepped on and his skull completely smashed. So it's definitely carrying over within that theme, but it was a lot. My favorite kill was probably the one that was the simplest, just because it was directed so well, and the timing of it was so great that I couldn't help but laugh when it happened because it was just so not where I was expecting this scene to go. And that is when the woman dressed up as the nurse is shooting at Michael, and he's in the car, and she's getting closer and closer to the car, and she gets close enough, she fires a shot, and just as she fires it, he swings the driver's side door at her, and it hits into her head that's holding the gun, and she shoots herself in the head. It is one of the most insane things I've ever seen, and it was incredible. That was like a Scream level kill. Michael gets style points for that one for sure. Much like the kid who Michael murders in the car in the first movie, there is another child murder in this installment, and it's done in a way that's just really eerie, and I'm of two minds about it. But earlier in the movie, there's a scene where three kids go to play a prank on the couple that currently lives in the Myers house, and we'll get to them later. There's three kids, two of them we see their faces, and the other one never takes his mask off. Later in the movie, the other two kids are out swinging, and they're talking about how, oh, we don't know where our friend went, and Michael shows up holding the bloody mask. The implication is pretty clear. In a lot of ways, I think that was kind of if you have to kill off a literal child, I think that was kind of the smart way to do it. We didn't actually see the kid, so we don't have an association with it, and we didn't have to see them get murdered. On the other hand, it's it's almost cheaping out, right? I think even for the most voracious of horror audiences, I don't think there's a huge appetite to seeing children get murdered. I don't think that's a huge selling point to any movie. But if you're gonna do it, it almost feels like you're chickening out a little bit. But then at the same time, I'm glad I didn't have to watch a kid get murdered. I mean, that mask was covered in blood, so it was, whatever happened to them was brutal. So again, I'm of two minds about it, but definitely that it was a really affecting image, Michael holding that bloody mask, and the implication of what happened. So aside from the kills, there are obviously other elements to the story. The first movie focused a lot on Laurie's personal trauma and the ways that trauma was passed down to other members of her family, the way it affected her relationships with them, the way it impacted her life and their lives. This movie kind of took that sort of microcosm and expanded on that to include the entire town of Haddonfield. What would this rather unassuming suburb, how would people who live there react to this kind of attack? They touch on a few different points of what a reaction to this sort of event would look like. One that there's kind of a whole sequence focused on in the middle is sort of the ineffectiveness of both the system of law enforcement, of law and order, and just vigilante mob justice. So clearly the system of Haddonfield, the police department, first responders are not equipped to deal with a Michael type situation. I would hazard to say that most, if not all, law enforcement agencies are unequipped to deal with a Michael type situation, which we will get into in a little bit. Judy Greer's character has a line where she says there's a system that we have in place to deal with stuff like this, and Laurie is very blunt. The message this movie is getting across is pretty clear: the system has failed. So this movie sees, in the wake of that system failing, the regular people of the town taking up arms to solve this problem themselves, vigilante justice, which very quickly turns into a mob mentality that has negative effects. In the first movie, when the bus crashed with all the prisoners, 2 escaped, Michael and 1 other. Like Michael, he was a prisoner in an institution for people with psychological issues. What those are not super clear. There is a moment where the town mistakes him for Michael because no one actually knows what Michael looks like, and that does result in an innocent person falling to their death. Everyone gets all riled up, and they think it's Michael. They chase him to the top of the hospital. Judy Greer, when she realizes the mistake, tries her best to save him. It's not enough, and he jumps to his death just simply out of fear and trying to avoid the mob that's after him. And there's this movie is not subtle, but there is some realization that, okay, this doesn't work either. And some of the reviews that I was reading were definitely down on this aspect that, the movie raises this question, but it doesn't answer it. And I don't think there's an easy answer to that question. It's not like the only 2 options for everybody being able to live in a community are complete law and order and vigilante justice. And the answer doesn't necessarily lie in between those 2 things either. But I do think those are kind of the only options that are available to a lot of people at this point. And I do think the movie did a good job of showing that, neither of these things really works. And they probably don't work in tandem either. And sometimes there is just a situation where this sort of thing is hopeless. Another theme the movie touches on is guilt, and not just survivor's guilt, but the guilt people feel when they're involved in this type of situation and they maybe make a wrong decision that results in other people getting hurt because it's a situation where the adrenaline is pumping. The only thing running through your body is cortisol, and you're maybe not thinking clearly and you're making snap judgments, and you might mess up. I would hazard to say that absolutely no one is psychologically or physically equipped to deal with a Michael Myers situation. But at the same time, even if we can know that in our heads, I feel that if a lot of us were in the same place, we would probably feel guilty about the mistakes we made, and maybe hindsight being 2020, if we had done things differently, if maybe we would have been able to save more lives. There's a whole element of the movie that flashes back to Halloween 1978. I can't say I was super crazy about the flashback scenes. If I'm being honest, I don't feel like they added a lot to the movie. They definitely were there to sort of, plant some ideas that would then be fully realized at the end. So maybe if they hadn't been in the movie, certain things that were talked about in the end wouldn't have had the same impact or would have felt a little bit out of left field. So I think in a lot of ways they served their purpose. I just wasn't super into them as they were happening and wanted to get back to the action of Halloween 2018. The Cliff Notes version is that Officer Hawkins traced Michael back to his house with another officer, and in the process of trying to apprehend Michael, killed the officer. And later, when Loomis was going to kill Michael after he had been apprehended by the police, Hawkins stopped him from killing him. And Hawkins later expresses this regret because he believes that if he had killed Michael, they wouldn't be facing this insane bloodbath 40 years later. The other element from the flashbacks is that Lonnie, as a child, had an interaction with Michael. He saw him outside of the Myers house and has sort of carried that with him through the years. Sort of the last big theme they touch on is the collective experience of Haddonfield with Michael Myers, both 40 years ago and today. this guy is part of the town's DNA. The YouTube channel Renegade Cut has a really great video about the predominance of American suburbs in horror films. It goes into how just the concept of the suburb was a response of primarily well-off white people to the influx of people of color and immigrants into cities. A lot of horror that takes place in the suburbs definitely has this underlying subconscious element of, what if this place that was created to be very safe from all the scary people was actually not as safe as we thought? I grew up in a suburb. I see a lot of my hometown in Haddonfield, and I think it's very accurate in depicting how people who have sort of lulled themselves into this false sense of security just because of where they lived would suddenly respond to a very violent, very dangerous threat. Another thing I really liked about this movie that it carried over from the first one in the trilogy was how it gave even people who were only on screen to be killed, it gave them these fully realized lives and relationships. There's a couple that is killed. I believe it's the actress who shows Loomis, Judith Meyer's headstone, and her husband. And before Michael gets there, they're just a couple squabbling over her little drone. She does like this really impressive flip with it that's like that everyone in the audience at the theater I was at was like, ooh, okay. There's also the couple that currently lives in the Myers house. They are a gay couple. They're both named John. They call each other Big John and Little John. And just even though they're really only there to be killed, I felt like I knew who these dudes were and what they were about. And I really appreciate that element. It allows for some moments of levity, which I think you definitely need in a movie like this. And it makes all these victims feel less disposable. I think a pretty valid critique of the slasher genre in general is that while I don't believe it seriously desensitizes people to violence, it is itself desensitized to violence, and that can just be kind of tough to watch after a while. So I do appreciate that people who are there to die still get portrayed as people who had lives and conflicts and relationships, and I think that just makes everything more compelling. So the things that I didn't like, and it's really just one kind of overarching thing, but the implications it has for this trilogy as a whole, I'm not super sold on. What the movie basically reveals or characterizes, I'm not quite sure what's the best terminology to use, but basically sets up Michael as not being man, not being like you and me, being this sort of unstoppable, supernatural killing machine. Which is, I'm not crazy about. But basically they set him up as this sort of Candyman-esque figure, a sort of a manifestation of the fears of the people of Haddonfield. I mean, they set him up to be truly the boogeyman, a sort of scary story that kids tell each other. Like the idea of a boogeyman and urban legends and old wives' tales, like those are things that are found throughout civilization, across time and space. I certainly grew up with stories that my friends and I would tell each other about certain houses and certain people. And I think at the end of the day, you never really get rid of the boogeyman because he doesn't just live in your mind, he lives in the mind of a community. So as long as stories are continued to pass down through the generations, then the boogeyman never really goes away. Again, this is something that is explored very in depth in Candyman, because the only thing that keeps him alive is people being afraid of him. In general, I'm not against the idea of the takeaway from this series being that evil never dies, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and that you can never kill the boogeyman. But I do think the end of the second movie in a trilogy is a really weird spot to make that point. Because all I could wonder as the credits were rolling is, okay, so where does this story even go? If we look at the trilogy as one long movie, and each entry into this trilogy as the first act, second act, third act, any screenplay book will tell you that you put the part of the story where all hope is lost at the end of the second act so that the third act can be about finding a way around that, reaching the climax, and then hitting your resolution. So yeah, if you look at any trilogy as one long movie, that moment, that all hope is lost moment, makes sense to put at the very end of the second movie to get people to come back to the third and see how it's all going to be resolved. But maybe this is just a lack of imagination on my part, which is totally valid, but I don't know how this gets resolved. The implication was very clear at the end of the movie that Michael is unkillable. And it's also very difficult to put that at the end of a movie where you have to wait a year for the next installment, as opposed at the end of the second act inside a movie where you only have to wait 30 minutes for things to resolve themselves. Like, I can tell myself in my brain, hey, there's still one more movie to turn this ship around, but I can't get myself to stop being bummed out at the end. Because probably the thing I dislike the most about the movie, even though I knew in my heart of hearts it was coming, is that Judy Greer, Karen Strode, is dead. I love Judy Greer just generally. I love her in these movies. It was really tough to watch her go, and I'm very upset about it. They did do it as sort of an homage to the first movie of Michael killing Judith. Of all the kills in the movie, it does do those kind of old school cutaways. It's definitely not as graphic and brutal as all the other ones, but it was still like, man, what a bummer to send everybody home on. Because I know when we come back for Halloween Ends, I now have to watch Laurie Strode mourn her daughter, a thing I really don't want to do. They spent a lot of the first movie examining Laurie and Karen's relationship and how Laurie's experience in Halloween 1978 impacted her relationship with her daughter. Laurie made a lot of sacrifices for Karen. Karen didn't get to have a normal childhood, and she literally sacrificed Karen to protect her. They talk about how when Karen is 12, social services comes to take her away. Laurie spent Karen's whole childhood preparing her to fight the boogeyman, and it was all for nothing. That's a really tough pill to swallow. So again, that goes back to my reservations that I have about the ending of this movie. If Michael is unstoppable, why are we here? I get that it can sometimes be naive to hope for something of like a happy ending out of a slasher film. I get it. We're going to watch people get murdered. It's not supposed to be happy, warm, and fuzzy. Trust me, I understand. Am I still the kind of idiot that gets attached to every single character in every slasher film I've ever seen? Yes. But I think there's such a difference between a movie that's just like, hey, we're just here to like set up all these characters and then kill them all off, and these movies which do seem to want to do something a little bit deeper. Like if you're going through all the trouble to do a deeper examination of this genre and to have these characters have emotional conversations, I don't want to leave the theater with the same feeling that I have when I watch any of the many slasher knockoffs that came in the wake of the original Halloween. I feel like the filmmakers want me to care about what's happening, and if I'm going to care about that, then the message can't be this nihilistic. I do want to end on a positive note, so I'll just say that I really enjoyed Kyle Richards' performance in this. I do think it's kind of incredible that her acting is but a mere footnote in her career. But listen, as someone who's been out of the game for a while, she came and she understood the assignment. This did not seem like it was a frivolous pursuit for her. She really brought it, and I was very moved by her performance. I thought she was excellent. I really hope she comes back for Halloween Ends. And in general, I would support a full return to acting from her. Now, I don't watch Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, so I don't know if she's someone that people like on there or hate on there. The most I know about that show is that video that went around where they dubbed over one of their fights with somebody whispering.
What is wrong with you? Kyle, shush up. You should have said right from the beginning. Nice, Kim. In 3 years, I have been okay. I talked to her on the plane and you were like this. The fuck is that? You don't act like this, Kim. You want me to defend you even though you act like that? I'm not. I've never needed you to defend me because you never have. Kim, yes I have. She does defend you, Kim. She does defend you 1,000%. She defends me more than you do.
But in general, I thought the inclusion of her and Tommy was great, and how the events of the original movie have impacted them as adults was definitely something that was worth examining. So what did you think of Halloween Kills? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Somewhere in between like me? Definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Also feel free to give this video a like. Again, I am fairly new to YouTube. This is only my second video, and I'm not quite sure what other videos I'm going to do. So if that level of chaos and uncertainty speaks to you, hit subscribe for a surprise. Thanks for watching. Bye.